You guys, what if I told you, for almost 300 years, while the ancient Near East was an absolute free-for-all, I'm talking Egypt versus the Hittites, empires literally tearing each other apart over Syria and beyond, one of the most historically significant regions on Earth, just chilled. Yeah, the Kassites of Babylon, nestled right in the thick of it, mostly sat out the epic world-shaking conflicts of the second millennium BCE, enjoying peace while everyone else was in an all-out brawl. We're diving into this insane era to see how they pulled off this wild disappearing act and what finally forced them into the biggest showdowns of their lives. All right, so you'd think with the Hyksos basically squatting in Egypt around 1700 BCE, and Babylon's first big dynasty totally face-planting by 1595 BCE, the whole ancient world would instantly erupt into chaos, right? Bzz, wrong. Kinda? See, the 16th century BCE was more like a strategic timeout. Imagine a bunch of rival sports teams after a brutal season. Everyone's licking their wounds, rehabbing their star players, and secretly sharpening their tactics for the next big game. These were the empires to be, getting ready to throw down in Syria later. Egypt, for instance, had just kicked the Hyksos invaders out of the Nile Delta by 1580 BCE. Whoosh! But the early pharaohs of the 18th dynasty were super busy cleaning house, consolidating power, basically just trying to make sure their own backyard was tidy before thinking about any world tours. Even Thutmose I's little road trip through Syria to the Euphrates around 1525 BCE. More like a quick drive-by, not a permanent land grab. He was just flexing a little. Meanwhile, over in Anatolia, a seriously important chunk of ancient Anatolian history, the old Hittite Kingdom was slowly, painfully falling apart. Think Jenga tower with too many pieces removed. Internal revolts, external invasions, it was a mess. After their king, Mursili I, the guy who actually conquered Aleppo and Babylon back in 1590 BCE, talk about a resume. His successors were like, nah, we're good, and basically ditched any claims south of the Taurus Mountains. Too much drama, apparently. And Assyria? They were kind of chillin'. Descendants of Prince Adasi, who'd freed them from Babylonian rule, were on the throne. But honestly, for us, these guys are mostly just names on a very dusty scroll because our info is super scarce. A few wall carvings, maybe a blink-and-you-miss-it mention of a Puzarashir III in some old document. So yeah, they were there, but not exactly lighting up the ancient world's marquee. But Babylon, though? They were getting a serious glow-up thanks to the Kassites. These folks were unifying things, setting up an impressive Kassite administrative system, basically making sure the government ran smoothly. But they weren't really feeling the whole world domination vibe, or maybe they just weren't ready for it yet. They had enough on their plate. But who was making moves? Enter the Hurrians and their Mitannian leaders. These guys were probably the busiest bees in the ancient Near East during this period. Now, we don't have a ton of written evidence from them directly, no ancient TikToks or anything, but based on what happened after, we can connect the dots. The Hurrians and Mitannians saw a massive power vacuum in Mesopotamia, stretching through northern Syria and northern Iraq. Hammurabi's empire was gone, the Hittites had pulled back from the region, it was like a free-for-all, and these smart cookies swooped in, organized themselves, and started building an epic kingdom right there. It was like everyone was either recovering, reorganizing, or just plain missing the memo, except for these guys. And that, my friends, is where things start to get real interesting. All right, settle in, grab your favorite sugar-free soda, because if you thought the last bit was interesting, and that, my friends, is where things start to get real interesting. Whoosh! Fast forward to the 15th century BCE, and suddenly the entire Near East is getting super spicy again thanks to some winds of change blowing in from an unexpected direction. Now, for like 2,000 years, Egypt had basically been living in its own little desert bubble. I'm talking politically isolated, like that one friend who never checks their group chats. Although, to be fair, they were totally down for international trade. They loved a good deal. Their desert borders were like a natural, impenetrable force field. But here's the thing. That northeastern border, super sketch. It was basically a revolving door for nomadic Amorites, who'd constantly sneak across the Suez Isthmus and cause absolute mayhem in the Delta. Annoying, sure, like a persistent pop-up ad, but these guys never really managed to take over the whole country. Then bam, the Hyksos showed up, invaded, and stuck around for ages. That, my friends, was Egypt's massive oh snap moment. They learned a crucial, painful lesson. If you want to avoid getting invaded in the future, you can't just play defense. You gotta take the fight to them. You gotta march into their countries, kick butt, and make them fall in line.
So, the 14th century BC? It's like someone finally dug up all the ancient documents. Imagine finding every single tweet, Instagram post, and secret diary entry from an entire civilization. We've got Hittite treaties, Assyrian records, Babylonian archives, and get this, 300 letters from kings all over West Asia, basically DMing Pharaoh Amenhotep III and IV. These aren't just dry scrolls, they're the ultimate receipts, shining a spotlight on epic military showdowns and some absolutely genius diplomacy of the ancient Near East. We're going to meet some seriously charismatic heavy hitters. Amenhotep IV, aka Akhenaten, the pharaoh who cared more about sun gods than battle plans. Kurigalzu II, the only Kassite king to actually conquer stuff. Ashur-uballit, the dude who liberated Assyria and put it back on the map. And then the main event, the MVP, the guy who basically owned the entire century, Suppiluliuma. Now, earlier in this century, Egypt and Mitanni were like the ultimate power couple, cementing their bond with lots of intermarriage and diplomacy. Egypt was basically the rich in-law, flashing gold and throwing huge weddings. Mitanni king Tushratta, after taking over, straight up married his daughter Taduhepa to the old pharaoh Amenhotep III and IV. And when the old pharaoh got sick, Tushratta sends him a famous statue of Ishtar of Nineveh, legendary for kicking nasty diseases to the curb. Even the Kassite king, Kadashman-Enlil I, sent his daughter to the pharaoh's harem and got massive shipments of gold in return. Even the Assyrians sent ambassadors. Gotta get permission from their Mitanni overlords first, of course. These aren't just political moves. These interactions were a huge deal for cultural exchange in ancient times, and they were all part of the complex trade and tribute systems that kept the ancient world humming. But then, bam, around 1382 BC, this guy, Suppiluliuma, seemingly out of nowhere, becomes king of the Hittites. A few years later, he marches his army into Syria. His first try at taking Aleppo? Nah, big fail. It was back in Mitanni hands. But Suppiluliuma wasn't a quitter. He regrouped, hit Syria from the north, sacked the Mitanni capital, Washukani, then spun west, grabbing Aleppo again, locking down crucial regions and even snagging Kadesh, basically Egypt's northern border in Syria. He was also a master manipulator, stirring up trouble among the Syrian princes, expanding his influence without even firing an arrow in some places. Then, like a boss, he leaves his loyal new vassals in charge and heads home for a solid 20 years to handle internal stuff. Suppiluliuma's first power play? A massive face slap for Egypt and an absolute catastrophe for Mitanni, who just lost everything west of the Euphrates, just like that. Now in Syria, local princes, totally backed by the Hittites, start picking fights with their neighbors, who are screaming for Egypt to step in. The Amarna archives are packed with these desperate pleas, plus endless reports about Palestinian chiefs getting raided by gangs, a true testament to the constant, complex regional conflicts of the Levant. But here's the kicker. Most of those letters? Radio silence. Pharaoh Amenhotep III was old, sick, and too weak to do anything. He dies shortly after Suppiluliuma's campaign, leaving the throne to Amenhotep IV, aka Akhenaten, the weak, effeminate, religiously obsessed pharaoh, totally under the thumb of his mom, Queen T. Akhenaten, for a bunch of reasons, decided not to dive into Syria's messy situation. But he did keep up his dad's foreign policy, even marrying Tadu-Hepa, his dad's youngest Mitanni wife, possibly the legendary Nefertiti herself. Also, he kept BFF status with the Kassite king, Burnaburiash II. The Armana letters show these two exchanging gifts like crazy. Horses and gems from the Kassite, ivory, gold, and ebony from the Egyptian. Though apparently the gold shipments weren't always up to snuff. We have a letter from the Babylonian king basically saying, "Yo, Pharaoh, you dude, that last 40 minutes of gold, kinda light when I melted it down. You sure your intern packed this right?" LOL. But these were just minor squabbles. Messengers kept trekking between them despite the insane distances, heat, and bandit raids. Akhenaten even married one of Burnaburiash's daughters, sending a wedding gift list so massive it filled over 300 lines of text. So Egypt ignored Syria. But why were the Mitanni so chill about losing half their kingdom? The answer? Civil war. Tushratta had actually assassinated his older brother to get the throne, so there were other royal princes itching for power. His brother, Artatama, declared himself a Hurrian king, causing a massive family feud. Artatama and his son, Shutarna II, hooked up with the Assyrians, who were still technically Mitanni vassals. These imperial court intrigues eventually led to Tushratta's murder around 1360 BC by one of his own sons. His successor, Matiwaza, tried to flee to Babylon, but Burnaburiash, wanting to stay neutral, said nope. So Matiwaza hail-tailed it to the Hittite court instead. With Mitanni in chaos, the Assyrians, along with another state called Alshe, basically carved up the Mitanni Kingdom. And just like that, without even firing an arrow, Ashur-uballit I not only freed Assyria from Mitanni dominance, but also played a massive role in bringing down the very empire his ancestors paid tribute to, paving the way for the awesome rise of the Assyrians to power. He even started calling himself Great King and King of the Universe. Talk about a glow-up! He even started direct correspondence with his brother, Pharaoh Amenhotep IV, and married his daughter to Burnaburiash, hoping his grandson would one day be king of Babylon.
All that wild stuff happened right after Suppiluliuma left Syria. But 20 years later, our Hittite MVP returns, and guess what? The political chessboard had totally flipped in his favor. In Egypt, Akhenaten had died around 1350 BC, and his successors, even Tutankhamun, were too busy trying to clean up the mess from Akhenaten's weird religious reforms to care about Syria. North of Mesopotamia, the Mitanni Kingdom, poof, gone. Ashur-uballit was busy building up his brand new Assyrian powerhouse. And in Babylon, after a quick civil war where Ashur-uballit's grandson got killed, Kurigalzu II took the throne in 1345 BC, but his eyes were fixed eastward, battling the Elamites. So Suppiluliuma's mission was simple: mop up any remaining Syrian resistance and organize his new territories. He signed treaties, gave Aleppo to one son, Carchemish to another, and even helped Matiwaza try to get his Mitanni throne back. Matiwaza did win a war, but ultimately he was crushed by the Assyrians, who pushed all the way to the Euphrates, gobbling up the last bits of the Mitanni Kingdom. By the time Suppiluliuma died in 1334 BC, the Hittites controlled all of Syria, right down to Damascus. But here's the twist ending. The Assyrian kingdom had once again become the strongest player in the whole ancient Near East. What a ride, right? Mind-blowing. All right, so last time we left off, it was all mind-blowing. And guess what? We're diving even deeper because the ancient world was always delivering the drama. After Suppiluliuma kicks the bucket, sorry historical records, but that's what happened, things get wild. The big question is, why did these two ancient frenemies, the Hittites and Egyptians, suddenly decide to bury the hatchet? Were they just totally fed up with all the fighting? Like, ugh, another war? Can't we just chill? Or was it something way bigger?
A new bad guy on the block making them go, uh-oh, we better team up. Think of it like this. You're in an epic video game, right? You've got two main bosses, always battling it out. But then a third, even scarier boss appears, coming out of nowhere with a huge power-up. Suddenly, Boss A and Boss B are like, maybe we should talk. That's exactly what happened with the Assyrians flexing their muscles. The mutual aid clauses in their new treaty and Hattusili's sneaky offers to the Kashites along the same time totally back up this new big bad theory. Now, for the Hittites, grabbing those booming port cities like Ugarit and Sumur, that was like hitting the jackpot. It was a guaranteed power-up. Because get this, those other warrior peoples, like the Achaeans, were basically blocking their beach access to the Mediterranean. No fun in the sun for you, Hittites! Syria itself was basically a gold mine with fertile land, and it was a perfect launch pad for military ops into Mesopotamia or even Egypt. But here's the kicker. The local elders there were about as reliable as a smartphone battery on 1%. Supudaliuma dies, and bam! Instant revolts everywhere, forcing his son Murshili II to basically go on a permanent cleanup crew tour. He probably looked at Egypt's pharaoh Seti I, who was also bogged down with similar issues in his Palestinian territories, and was like, yeah, you feel me, bro. These revolts in Syria and Palestine weren't just random. They were like little sparks igniting an even deeper feud between these two superpowers. And that simmering tension exploded when Ramesses II, this super ambitious pharaoh, decided he was going to repeat Tutmosis' glory and push Egypt's borders all the way to the Euphrates. This, my friends, leads to one of the most famous, most epic battles in ancient history, the Battle of Kadesh in 1285 BC. Picture this, thousands of chariots, a clash of titans. But here's the anticlimax. After all that epicness, it was basically a tie. Both sides claimed victory, classic move, right? And everyone went back to pretty much where they started. Lame. But then 16 years later, Ramesses II and Hattusili III shake hands, sign a peace treaty. We actually have both the Egyptian and Akkadian versions, which is super cool. And Ramesses even marries a Hittite princess. Talk about diplomacy. But let's pivot for a hot second to the Assyrians because their destiny was pretty much carved out from their geography from day one. Look at the map. To the north and east, their narrow little Tigris River basin was surrounded by mountains so high and gnarly they were almost impossible to get through. And guess who lived there? Super fierce tribes like the Gutians and Lulubians, who basically had to be kept in check with constant brutal campaigns. To the west, you had hundreds of miles of open steppes just begging for enemy armies or nomadic raiders to come through. So getting a grip on that steppe wasn't just about expansion. It was about securing a vital lifeline for Assyria. It meant strategic geographical control over northern Syria, dominating crucial trade routes, and even getting a window to the Mediterranean. To the south, just a hop, skip, and a jump away, lay the super-rich Mesopotamian delta. This was both a massive temptation and a huge headache because everyone, Akkadians, Sumerians, Babylonians, wanted a piece of that northern Mesopotamian pie. When Babylon was strong, the Assyrians were lucky to grab a few border villages. But when Babylon was weak, whoosh, anything was possible for Assyria, even all the way to the Persian Gulf. And it was this exact Assyrian success, happening just a few years after Kadesh, wiping out the last Hurrian stronghold and pushing Assyrians right to Carchemish, practically on Syria's doorstep. That was the real wake-up call, the reason the Hittites and Egyptians finally buried the hatchet.
Honestly, when you look at that geography, it explains pretty much every single war in Assyrian records from the 13th century onward. We're talking mountain guerrilla warfare, massive military movements across the steppes, even trench warfare in the Middle Tigris Valley. That was the blood price the Assyrians had to pay, not just for power and expansion, but literally just to stay free. So, as soon as Ashur-uballit finally kicks the Mitannian overlords out, the fight just explodes on all three fronts. His son, Enlil-mirari, immediately attacks Babylon, crushes Kurigalzu's forces, and then, get this, they actually agree to divide fields and provinces and fix the borders again. Imagine that, actual negotiation. Later, Eric Den Eli's records show campaigns into the Zagros Mountains, and his successor, Adad-nirari I, sends his troops across the Jazira, temporarily taking control all the way to Carchemish on the Euphrates. We even have a text describing him forcing the Kassites to sign a new border agreement. But the real heavyweight champ of this Assyrian dynasty? Without a doubt, it was King Shalmaneser I, 1274 to 1245 BC. This dude was an absolute legend. He subdues the impenetrable mountains of Urartu, that's Armenia, folks, crushes the Gutians, skilled in raids, and then, talk about a plot twist, he turns on his former allies, the Hurrians. He attacks Shatuara, calling him the king of Hani Galbat, along with a bunch of pirates from the Hani and Elami peoples. And his victory? He writes it down himself, sounding like a total boss. He writes, and I quote, "Prepare yourselves. This is intense. I fought the battle and inflicted defeat upon them. I killed countless scattered soldiers. I seized 9 of his fortified fortresses with his capital and reduced 180 of his cities to ruins and mounds. I subjugated their land to my authority and burned the rest of their cities with fire." Boom. Talk about a mic drop. We're talking mid-13th century BC. And Babylon? Oh boy, Babylon's in a seriously bad spot. Imagine being caught between a rock and a hard place, but the rock is a super buff, aggressive Assyrian warrior, and the hard place is a suddenly very active Elamite empire that just popped back onto the political scene after chilling out for like 400 years. That's like your forgotten rival from high school suddenly showing up at your job with a six-pack, a fancy new car, and a promotion. Completely unexpected and totally threatening. See, the new Elamite royal family in Susa wasn't just ambitious, they were basically on a power trip. Their to-do list included dominate the Kassites in Iraq, that's Babylon folks, and dominate the rest of the Kassite tribes chilling in Iran. So, just shortly after 1250 BC, poor King Castiliash IV of Babylon finds himself in a truly awful sandwich. On one side, you got Untashnaparisha, the Elamite ruler who built those insane ziggurat and temples at Choga-Zanbil, legit ancient architecture goals, and on the other, King Tukulti-Ninurta I of Assyria. These guys were not playing. Now, spoiler alert, the Elamites actually win the first round against Babylon, but here's the kicker. It's Tukulti-Ninurta and his Assyrians who ultimately swoop in and take over Babylon. Talk about stealing someone's thunder. The Assyrians were so pumped about this, they actually wrote the only Assyrian epic poem we still have all about it. It's called the Epic of Tukulti-Ninurta, and guess what? It's super biased, like totally painting Castiliash as a double-crossing villain who broke his promises, conspired against Assyria, and totally deserved to have the gods abandon him. Classic winner's narrative, right? But wait, there's more. A quick little report found on a wall inscription in Assyria gives us a very different vibe. This thing makes it sound like Tukulti-Ninurta just rolled up to Babylon like, "Nah, I'm bored, I'm going to conquer something." He writes, and I quote, "Prepare yourselves, this is intense. I forced Castiliash, king of Karduniash, to enter battle. I inflicted defeat on his armies and annihilated his warriors. In the midst of that battle, I clasped Castiliash, the Kassite king, with my own hands. I cut his royal neck like a chair and brought him, shackled and naked, before the god Ashur. I subjugated the lands of Sumar and Akkad to their farthest borders under my authority, extending the borders of my land to the lower sea where the sun rises." Okay, seriously, cut his royal neck like a chair? That's vivid. And bringing him naked and shackled before a god? My dude went full villain mode there. Like, he didn't just win, he wanted to make it a statement. After this wild ride, Babylon basically becomes Assyria's little puppet show. 3 different princes sit on the throne in rapid succession, but they're just Assyrian pawns. And just when you think it can't get crazier, the Elamites, who are apparently still around and still mad, push deep into Babylonian territory and even reach the city of Nippur. But hold on, the Babylonians are tough cookies. After 7 years, they managed to bring their own national dynasty back to power. One Babylonian chronicle totally hypes it up.
the nobles of Akkad and Karduniash revolted and placed Adad-Shuma-Usur on the throne of his father. See? Underdog comeback.
And what about our boy Tukulti-Ninurta, the first Assyrian king to reach the Persian Gulf? Well, karma's a real thing, even in ancient Mesopotamia. A few years after his epic conquests, he bites the dust in a really nasty way. The chronicles say, "As for Tukulti-Ninurta, who brought evil upon Babylon, Ashur-nadin-apli and the Assyrian nobles revolted against him and deposed him from the throne. In Tukulti-Ninurta, they besieged him in his palace and cut him down with his own sword." Whoa! Betrayal, a siege, and getting sliced with his own sword? Talk about a poetic, if brutal, end. The dude who cut his royal neck like a chair gets, well, you know. His successors, weakened by family squabbles and internal wars, couldn't really do much more than little piddly attacks on Babylon. So, ironically, it wasn't the Assyrians who delivered the final knockout blow to the Kassite dynasty of Babylon in 1168 BC. Nope, it was the Elamites. That year, Shutruk-Nahonte storms out of Susa with a massive army, attacks southern Iraq, and just loots it like never before. Famous monuments, priceless art, Hammurabi's Code, the Stele of Naram-Sin, the Manishtushu obelisk, all packed up and shipped to Susa to basically live there forever. Bam! Babylon's entire art collection went bye-bye. Babylon itself gets conquered and handed over to Shutruk-Nahonte's son. But then wham! A Kassite prince with a super cool Babylonian name, Enlil-nadin-apli, which means Enlil is giver of brothers, awesome, right? Somehow snatches Babylon back and rules for 3 years. A brief flicker of hope. But then another Elamite king, Shilhakan-Shushenaq, swoops in 1162 BC and takes him down. And get this, the statue of the god Marduk, it gets taken captive by the Elamites. Again! The statue has been through more travel than my luggage during holiday season. It had already been taken by the Hittites 433 years before this. Seriously, this statue is just having the worst time. And with that, folks, the curtain falls on the reign of the longest dynasty in Babylon's entire history. From being a geopolitical hot potato to getting its prized possession stolen and its god statue taken on yet another forced vacation, Babylon saw it all during this wild, wild time. What an absolutely bonkers stretch of ancient history. After that, what an absolutely bonkers stretch of ancient history. You might think the fall of the Kassites was the biggest deal, right? Wrong. That was just a tiny tremor before the historical earthquake, folks. We're talking about a full-on multi-continent meltdown that led straight to what historians officially dub the... Imagine this and get ready for some serious historical chaos. While the Elamites were absolutely storming Babylon, over in Anatolia, the mighty Hittite Kingdom, poof, vanished from the map like a bad magic trick. Egypt, barely shaking off one major attack, was now weak as a kitten, torn apart by internal drama. Meanwhile, the Philistines are settling into Canaan, Moses is leading his people on one of the most epic journeys ever recorded, and these super aggressive Aramean nomads are making life a living nightmare for everyone from Syrian princes to the kings of Assyria. And way out west, the Dorian Greeks are throwing punches across the Hellenic Peninsula. But wait, there's more! New groups of Indo-Europeans were on the move again in West Asia, and guess what they brought to the party? Iron! They were literally dropping bronze like it was a hot potato, just like their ancestors introduced horses, launching humanity into a brand new era. This wasn't just a tough century. It was a total reset button for the ancient world, sparking a cascade of ethnic movements and political upheavals that totally reshaped the Near East practically overnight. This, my friends, was nothing less than the absolute, total, mind-bending collapse of an entire freaking civilization.
And that, my friends, is how a seemingly small event fits into an even bigger, universe-shattering historical earthquake. If your brain just did a backflip from all that ancient chaos, you know what to do. Smash that like button. Seriously, click it right now. And hit subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the weirdest, wildest corners of history. Let me know in the comments below what historical collapse blows your mind the most. Next time, we're diving into what happened after the dust settled and the Iron Age officially kicked off. And trust me, it gets even crazier. All right, guys, catch you in the next one. Peace. If you found this video valuable, hit like to help us reach more people and subscribe to be the first to know the truth. If you want to support our journey, consider joining channel membership or supporting us via PayPal. All links are in the description below. Your support keeps us going.